we have a panel of four of the most engaging, whether you call them emerging leaders, current leaders, or leaders going places. They are, I think this is a really exciting panel of people to hear from. It's a really simple topic in a lot of ways. Where are we going with the future of work? And are we preparing students for the future of work? I will introduce them in order from this end. So we have Lorne Neudorf, Dean of Law from the Trobe University, Amanda White, Deputy Associate Dean, Education, UTS, Jenny George, Professor Jenny George from the Melbourne Business School, Dean of the Melbourne Business School at the University of Melbourne, and Professor Marek Tesar from Dean of Education, University of Melbourne. Thank you all for joining us. Now, we're hoping this is a fairly conversational panel. Lorne, I'll start with you. Are we at risk of false advertising by encouraging graduates to come in at a time when we don't know what they're going to emerge into?
I mean, it's a good question. I think there's a lot of uncertainty about what the future of work looks like. One thing that's a little bit maybe different, and it would be true in education as well, is that law is an accredited degree. And things don't move very quickly there. So law is a very conservative profession. It takes a lot of time. We will not play with our core subjects very easily because the accrediting body wants to see certain prescribed areas of knowledge being taught there and a certain way of assessing students. But in a way, it's kind of come back in fashion a little bit because learning to have the skills and knowledge that you need in an AI-enabled future, let's say, is actually really important. So we've always had, exams that are invigilated, secure assessment. We have sometimes those exams are worth 60, even 70% of the student's final mark to show that they have the competency. They can be closed book exams as well. So you have to really be able to think. We used to have oral exams actually in law school as well. So these things were not very popular for a period of time because they're quite costly as assessment methods. But actually now I think our graduates coming out really do have the skills. And I'm happy to talk a bit later maybe about some of the challenges in the field in the legal profession with AI, the hallucination problem. Chief Justice Andrew Bell from New South Wales has really identified a number of challenges there. But the key is having students to graduate who are able to have that discernment. They can actually verify the accuracy of AI outputs and engage with it in a really highly technical way as a human being. And I think law is actually in a good position to ensure that that is the case.
But just before we go to the rest of the panel, will there be a job waiting when someone enrolls this year?
It's a good question. Our employment outcomes are very strong. We haven't seen a dip there. But what I would say about that is that the kind of entry-level graduate, positions, there could be some of that work that starts to be kind of farmed out to AI and technology. And I suppose the challenge for us as, educators in law is to ensure that the students have whatever that next step is into employment. So what we're trying to do with our elective subjects is have more practical skills training. So they actually go into clinical settings. They work under a supervising lawyer as part of their law degree. So even if those entry-level positions are changing, they're ready when they graduate to take that next step, even if it's one step above where it is currently right now.
So Amanda, there's a couple of questions for you. One came straight from Ian's presentation this morning when he suggested undergraduate accounting education could be done by AI, essentially. Not quite, I paraphrase. Firstly, what's your thoughts on where is accounting education going? Secondly, you've got a reputation for engaging with students and keeping really engaged. What are they telling you?
Yeah, accounting is accredited like law, though we are moving slightly faster than the Priestley 11 moves in terms of its requirements. But what I think is the challenge in all of this, and an algorithm could scrape my YouTube channel with its 120,000 subscribers and make a really good facsimile of me teaching, auditing financial statements or introductory accounting or whatever it is. And so I think the recognition that students learn differently. And in the old days, we turned up to lectures because there was nothing else. There was no alternative besides the lecture and the textbook and maybe a secret underground recording shared on a CD, bird CD, of somebody talking about the topic. But now if you've got a poor lecturer, there are so many other alternative substitutes on YouTube through the democratization of education that students go, oh, I'm not going to turn up. I can find an alternative. I can use Copilot to teach me introductory economics when it's going too fast. And so AI is really changing how we teach students. It's allowing me to make bigger case studies quicker. It's allowing me to personalize. But like in law, the number of graduates firms expect to hire is going to decrease 30% in the next 3 years. They're doing more experienced jobs. And so we need to figure out how we teach them the really important communication skills that they don't get when they're texting each other on their phones. And that's what's making the difference. But the challenge is many of our academics aren't always the best communicators either. So how do we, upskill ourselves? How do we find time as academics? I'm sure everybody here is under the pump. Somebody suggested to me in a mental health and wellness session that I should just work 35 hours a week, and at 5 o'clock I could just leave it. I was like, perhaps you don't understand how the university sector works. But trying to find the time to upskill and the desire, and this comes from both of the presentations, which was education is the product that we sell. It's the thing that keeps the lights on. It's not the research dollars, because research pays for itself, but every single salary, lights, electricity, water comes from education. But we don't provide the training, the breadth of time to allow people to upskill so that they can do that.
Awesome. Now, Jenny, you've written a couple of pieces recently about how we should abandon job-ready education in some senses, or perhaps how also employers shouldn't expect graduates to turn up job-ready and they need a breadth of skills. Where does this all fit in terms of AI preparing people for the future?
I think it's a really important conversation to be having with that question about AI. And in fact, I think the two go really carefully and neatly together. If we are teaching within our programs things that are capable of being replaced by AI immediately, we're doing the wrong things in the degree. And that's exactly, I think, the point about this. By the way, when I said job ready, I did not mean the job ready package. I meant, just because I need to clarify that, what I meant was particularly employers seem to expect that a 21-year-old who's never been in a workplace should come out of a degree operating as if they've worked in a workplace. That is not realistic, and it's a waste of university time to do it. And I think that's it's a very helpful thing to put alongside AI and say the very things that you're kind of that you're hoping for in that first graduate are exactly the things we shouldn't be spending time on, in part because those early day sort of skills that you're hoping for in that first year will be replaced by AI. The things that you really need to have in a university education are the longer term, deeper thinking skills, which are not about job readiness, but they are about the kind of skills that cannot be replicated easily by AI. So I think the two conversations happening at the same time is a useful way to frame and view this issue.
Absolutely. Which leads beautifully to you, Marek. You've taken on the Dean's job here, 3 months ago, 4 months ago?
6 months ago.
6 months. So you've had a chance to get your feet under the desk.
Sure.
Fix all the problems.
Absolutely.
And so now everything's under control and going in the right direction. Where do we go from here with our educators of the future? So you're in charge of a large faculty of education.
Yes.
Where do we go for the educators of the future, teaching them what they need to know when we all know we've been struggling with students knowing more than what we know?
It's a great question, and I don't really have an answer for that. But what I do know, though, that no matter what we do, we need to ensure that we are working with our students and having a critical thinkers and critical consumers of any kind of knowledge. 30 years ago, I've been part of the panels and debates about whether Google will replace our teachers. whether knowledge actually is still valued and whether it's still important in a time of internet and Google, when you can find out information, how we need to change our curriculum and our approaches. I mean, now in a time of AI, I'm not that much, I often ask myself that, why am I not excited about AI? I mean, why is it sort of, and part of it is that the pace is quite rapid, but the actual technological change is not that interesting. What's really interesting is the intellectual project that's associated with AI. And I think that in the university, we have a responsibility to think about AI as an intellectual project and what it means for our graduates, what it means for the future of work. I mean, that's why I quite like to think about it in a way when you read, I'm a philosopher by training. So when I sort of read philosophy, sort of philosophers would argue, for example, some of the most recent philosophers like Biesta, they would argue that AI should be really average intelligence, not artificial intelligence, and we should be really thinking how to critically use it. Is it really useful knowledge, or is it just really just distraction, or is it just really disruption of the current state of things? So there is something to consider. And when you ask, and to answer a question more directly, well, you know, I tend to think, well, we still have degrees, we still have universities, they matter, and we know why they matter. But what I'm really interested in is, and to sort of also continue where Jenny sort of ended, is that, well, our degrees are sort of, they are not passports towards some kind of employment. They are sort of more sort of a compass that sort of shows you where to go and what kind of skills do you need to have for towards the future. And that's where the critical knowledge and engagement in a university really matters. So that's where I would end.
Oh, which leads me to a question, and we'll just go to anyone who wants to respond to these questions from here on in. So Singapore Management University President Lily Kong wrote a paper just recently about the shelf life of degrees shortening. 3 or 4 years of study at university can no longer sustain a 50-year career, she said. When I was talking to Ian Chubb, the former VC of ANU last week, he suggested the shelf life was far shorter and that perhaps 5 years was it. What do we do about shelf life? Is AI reducing the shelf life of degrees? And how do we change learning and, if you like, the product, what we're selling, courses?
I'll have a go at that. So yes and no. I'm already part of a postgraduate school, which is all about training people after they've been in the workforce for a certain amount of time. So I naturally believe and think that there is a role for continuing education. Having said that, everyone in this room, I imagine, has done university study, and you're all halfway through your degree. It is difficult, I think, to quantify how our minds and our capabilities have been shaped by some really important and formative education that we did. For me, I did sort of an applied maths undergrad and an applied maths PhD. I do not use the applied maths I do in my day-to-day job as a dean. Does it change the way I think? Every day. Every decision I make is changed by that. Does it mean I don't need further education? Not at all. I've continued to do really interesting things to extend myself and do more. But I don't think shelf life is the right way to frame it. I think if you're doing the right kind of education in an undergraduate degree, it does have a 50-year shelf life. But does it mean that you learnt a technique or a tool that will be used in 50 years' time? No. But if we're about techniques and tools, we're already on the wrong track, in my view. I think that we ought to be setting people up so that they may not be able to quantify every time that they do something in whatever, part of their job or career they have. They may not be able to quantify, I learned this particular skill in my second year subject back, 25 years ago. No. But it should be part and parcel of who they've become in a way that adds value every single day for 50 years. So I'm a kind of a wanting to reframe both and I would never talk about the shelf life of a degree in that way.
Right. Any other thoughts?
Well, I would. The other thing is, for a lot of young people coming to university, this is a time for them to build self-regulation and executive function skill. Because a lot of that, when they're in high school, the teacher takes care of, have you done this? Where is this happening? Have you got your assignment for feedback? I've seen schools where there is unlimited feedback reviews. You don't like the mark, you send it back for another review, do it again. And so university is not just, it's partly content, but it's skills, but it's building that regulation of how do you manage yourself? How do you present yourself? How do you make connections? And it takes time to do that. We can't teach critical thinking in one subject. It takes a structured approach over a period of semesters to help develop these broader skills that they're not necessarily going through an inventory and going tick, tick, tick. But hopefully 5 years after graduation, sometimes you run into students who go, I never realized, Miss, when you were asking me to learn to think on my feet, that was going to be important when I had to do a board presentation. So it's this longer process of becoming that's really important as well.
Can I just say, so I agree that the university education and the experience of going to university is a really transformative one. But I also think, particularly at a place like La Trobe, 40%, more than 40% of the students are the first in their family to go to university. They do want that job at the end. They are very keen to be employed in the legal sector right after graduation. So we do have a special mission around that. And so upskilling, making sure that they are able to step into those graduate positions is a really key part of our mission. But I think that, obviously the experiences they have at university are really important for them to develop their legal career, but there are opportunities for us in lifelong learning to come back, lawyers to, CPD credits, they come back for kind of upgrades, so to speak, on the latest law. Law is changing. I mean, every day there's a new case, many new cases. There's new legislation all the time. In one of my other roles, I'm a legal advisor to a Senate committee in the federal parliament, scrutinizing delegated legislation, 1,500 instruments a year we look at the committee. So there's a lot of new content coming out. And lawyers sometimes pivot in their career. They might start in a way as a bit more of a generalist, or they kind of have a broader scope of practice, and then they end up specializing over time. So I think there are real opportunities for us, particularly at a place like La Trobe, to engage, more long-term beyond the university degree, the first one.
And it's expensive. Going to university is expensive, especially if you're an international student or you're a first in family and you're from a low socioeconomic area. So thinking about value for money has to be an important thing. When my colleagues say, it doesn't matter what you study, I say, for a lot of these kids, the luxury of being able to pick a generalist degree is not one that they're going to have because they need to support their families, if they have families themselves or parents or siblings. Figuring out a clear career pathway is still an important thing. And the very first time I went into my graduate certificate for higher education teaching and learning, I was told that teaching for a specific career pathway meant I was a neoliberal shill. And it put me into an existential crisis. My gosh, I teach people to go into a specific career and that career really helps them, but I'm a neoliberal shill. So I think we have to sort of be careful because it's time and money that they're investing. And I always encourage them to think of it like that. Like, this is the time you're investing in yourself as an asset to be able to generate future revenue for yourself. Sorry, I'm an accountant. I can't help it.
I would just add to that. I do agree with colleagues what they're saying, but I also think, as someone who is in education, and I think whenever you read such a research, it talks about shelf life degrees. I mean, it's a sort of also time and space for self-reflection on what we're doing and how we're engaging with our communities and how we actually construct our curriculum. Is the curriculum static or is it sort of porous, and does it allow us to have the leaky architecture of our curriculum and pedagogical approaches? Are we actually working with our communities, or are we simply are we factories for degrees, or are we actually engaging with the sort of future of the workforce? So I think there is certain, I don't know, that research, and I'm always a little bit sort of thinking in which discipline, in which area, and is it 5 years or 4.5? But at the same time, I do think that whenever such a research comes out, it's really important to take it seriously and to think about it, what it means. And that's that kind of constant self-reflection that actually, for example, we at Melbourne, which we postgraduate faculty, so we take very carefully, and consider it.
I'll bring the tone down a little bit from high-level pedagogy and education theory down to pictures. So if you're creating a brochure, and we'll all be in the area where we still, like it or not, have to create a brochure or a website, a teacher will be represented by, used to be chalk, now maybe a laptop, a accountant by always a calculator, a lawyer.
Should be an Excel spreadsheet now.
A lawyer may be a wig. When you get to, with those pictures, we're trying to convey this is where this degree is taking you. How do we bridge the gap between the important changes that are happening in our institutions and what the outside world is seeing and where they're expecting to go?
I'd say that's industry partnerships, right? In accounting, we're always talking with our accounting firms, with marketing firms. It's never been more important as an academic to stay connected with your alumni. So that next week I'm heading to Vietnam for a talk at a conference. I did a quick search on LinkedIn for my alumni that are living there. I said, look, do you want anything from the UTS merch store? Because I'm always trying to get them to wear merch where they are as free advertising. But those connections help me stay in touch with what our graduates need. They're much more likely to say, oh, Amanda, university students just really can't talk to each other. Like when they come out, they don't know how to have a conversation with a stranger. And so that connection through our industries and for individual academics as well, because you talked about a brochure, the brochures that don't show real people, that don't show the teachers, because learning is relational. We talked, AI could replace us all. I guess we could build really strong relationships with an AI agent that knows us well and might teach us. But teaching is such a strong relational activity. Earlier, I think it was Ian talked about trust in universities. Belonging and trust doesn't come from thinking about the prestige of the institution. Maybe at a group of 8, I don't know, I'm at outside the group of 8 university, but it comes from building strong relationships with educators, less so the researchers who are not in the classroom. The people in the classrooms build the relationships that build the trust. And then once you have that, then you leverage it for making sure your degree is doing what it needs to do to help your students get the jobs they want, have the skills that they need to develop. And it's people that do that. It's not, I love our website, but students will often say, I searched UTS and business and I found you on Google or TikTok or Instagram.
Tim, can I just say I'm so glad you didn't mention a gavel in the brochure because lawyers, judges, we don't use gavels in Australia, never, but it's always the symbol. But I would say the industry connection is really important. Law is a very applied discipline, right? There's a very practical side to it. There is a theoretical side, and we as academics study jurisprudence and we get doctorates in the philosophy of law, but the students need a blended approach to that. And so the industry connection, and I think particularly around first in family for us is really important, actually seeing mentors out there, seeing career pathways forward. I was just talking about Ben Carroll, who's the Deputy Premier of Victoria. He's one of our Trobe law graduates, and he has this great story where, his dad was an electrician, and he was from Airport West, and he just made this incredible career out of that. So I think that's really important. But I think for us, the people skills, as you're mentioning, are really key. Being able to communicate with clients, so we putting them in a clinical setting, also having those mooting experiences for lawyers, mock trials and going into competitions. That's something we really want to highlight for the students, so that they're just, away from campus or doing everything online or behind a screen, but actually they're on their feet engaging with other, students and with judges as well, getting evaluated in that way. Yeah.
Great.
I would just, that I would make two comments. One comment is about that picture that you painted of a teacher, how they look like. I mean, some of the most exciting, so I came from New Zealand where I was academic lead and we did a lot of work in Pacific Islands. And that's where I've seen some of the best teaching in the most under-resourced communities. And similarly here, I visited where teachers go on placement to Yirrkala region, to Northern Territory, and some of the best teaching happens there where there is no electricity. Some of the most advanced pedagogical innovative practices. And I don't think that we don't need to really, the idea that we need to rely on a laptop and technology in order to be the best possible teachers, and that's what really matters. I think that's a really false proposition, and I think it's really easily to fall into that trap to think that AI technology or any other pedagogical innovation sort of happened. The colleagues that are really great with AI, for example, and towards the future in my faculty, they've been always great with new pedagogical approaches. It doesn't really matter. AI didn't change that kind of thing. AI is sort of disruptor, but it doesn't really change the pace. And the second point which I would make is about the engagement with community, with clients, with industry. Absolutely agree with that. And that's for me is as a sort of new dean is also to think about my faculty, and I want my faculty to be less concerned with themselves and with the faculty and more concerned with outside. And I think in academia, it's always very easy to become so concerned with our own issues and problems, and rather than to think with
Comes back
colleagues,
to those
students.
metrics, right?
Yeah.
That they were talking about, those promotion requirements and the rankings. Yeah. Imagine if we just all withdrew at the same time.
We're not going to do that, but
Right? We've got to have a collective action to make that change.
Jenny, what's your thoughts on bridging the gap? There's a lot of fear and bling around AI. How do you get a real conversation going?
Yes. Look, it's an interesting question. If I can take us more, perhaps broader society fears, if that's okay, helpful.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting paper that's just been published a couple of weeks ago. If you go on the Stanford Human AI Lab website, Eric Brynjolfsson's one of the authors. I can't remember the other two, I'm so sorry, but it's everywhere at the moment. It was late August, it was published. There's fascinating data. They've taken American labor stats, but they've done something really interesting and important, and that is to look at them that's divided by age groups. And what it shows is that overall employment is going up. They've divided it by AI-intensive industries and those that are less AI-intensive. So examples of AI-intensive industries are coders, call centers, operators, and so on. Examples of less AI-intensive industries are things like caring professions. So they've looked at these and they've looked at it across age groups. They find that employment in general in the American economy has gone up over the last couple of years. And they look by year. And when you see ChatGPT come onto the scene a couple of years ago, it starts diverging. And it starts diverging, but it's very interesting. And that is that there's actually higher employment for more experienced people in AI-intensive industries and a dramatic drop in entry-level jobs. That is not the same pattern that you see in the caring professions, in things that are not AI intensive. So they're very careful not to draw conclusions that they can't draw from the data. So they make suggestions rather than saying that this data is definitely showing it. But it is very suggestive and very interesting data. So it does suggest that there is a hollowing out, which we've expected would be happening, that is already showing up in the data for entry-level positions in AI-intensive industries. However, that this is offset by actually much higher, unexpectedly high levels for the more experienced positions in those same industries. I think the interesting thing for us as educators is to ask what is going on there. And there's a really interesting, again, suggestion. They're not in the paper saying anything that they don't have the data to say, but a suggestion that perhaps what is happening is that the human judgment skills, the things that AI can't provide, are actually even more important in those AI-intensive industries. So how can we as educators help to get that for people through a mechanism that isn't 10 years of experience, but that can get them up that curve? Incidentally, I'm not a doom and gloom person. I think this, with a sort of a semi-economist hat on, I think this whole thing will resolve because we'll run out of experienced people and we'll be forced to go and hire the juniors just because we've got a need for these. This is a temporary blip. And it will kind of come to equilibrium because things always come to equilibrium because fundamentally economics tells you that things get back to an equilibrium somewhere. We will get there. But what I think is interesting for us is how can we help that to happen with less pain? And how we can help that to happen with less pain is ask, what is it that these experienced people are able to do collaborating with AI? Because I think the pattern here is that those experienced people are able to effectively collaborate with AI and actually add more value. They are getting higher value. It's not that they're keeping those positions the same and just replacing the junior people with AI. They're hiring more of those experienced people. So somehow that collaboration is actually adding extra value. That's something I think is really interesting for us to have a think about, and whether or not we can help to get people to that adding value place faster. Anyway, sorry, I've had a
Interesting.
bit of a go.
There's an interesting challenge there because there's a common saying amongst students, P's get degrees. And any student who's studying IT will tell you now that the market has created for IT graduates, and they're thinking, what do I do? And, you know, the employers are all telling us in these fields that are AI intensive, we want the standout students. And so how do we ensure that when they're coming into first year, we tell them about the reality of what it's going to be like in the workplace, and that P's getting degrees might be fine if your dad owns the hedge fund that you're going to work for. But for the majority of our students, you know, you're going to need to think about the long-term gain, about that investment in yourself, always coming back to that sort of point, because being a mid, as the young people say, if you're mid at software engineering, that's not going to get you a job anymore, or in accounting or in law. You need to figure out how you build your brand for yourself, and then how do you make yourself stand out?
That must be a fairly hard message for them, just as they think they've got in.
They actually, most young people understand perception of self quite a bit better than we think, because TikTok and Instagram, you know, it's the highlight reel that they're showing to the world of their lives and themselves. And so when you can point a lot of that effort from weird dances and memes into building your professional career profile from the first day, and, you know, a lot of students will volunteer so they can have the photo with the dean, and they can put that on their LinkedIn. But, you know, you got to figure out how you hook them into that ecosystem early. Like, oh, Amanda, like, it's 4 years from now. Do I really need to think about this? I'm like, yes. And that goes for academics as well. It's not just students. We probably do a really bad job ourselves at selling our expertise, our institutions, and what we do for the broader public. And, you know, that'll help with that whole trust issue.
Can I just say, so in law, we're training students through assessment and other ways to actually find new opportunities to apply their legal skills. So when you do a research paper and use an AI-generated output, use an LLM, let's say ChatGPT, there absolutely will be errors in there. You know, there will be very, very hard to see, very hard to spot, but there will be. And so the students will go through that analysis and see where the frailties are, the limitations, and they developed a good sense of discernment about that. I mean, there was just a lawyer in the last month here in Victoria who had his practicing certificate restricted because he made a submission to court that had all these made up citations in it. And so he was referred for, you know, disciplinary investigation. And so now he can only work as an in-house lawyer, essentially, as an employee, not have his own practice. There's a legal database that tracks this from all over the world. There's about 370 cases so far, 29 from Australia. Some of them are judges. Judges are using it too, and things sneak in there. It quotes an act, a section of an act, and it's actually not in the act, or the wording is different. And, you know, when you're looking at very highly litigated, very expensive cases, I mean, these cases are $1 million in lawyers' fees, things turn sometimes on just the interpretation of a single word. You cannot have any room for error in that. And so teaching the students to really become hyper technical in a way, they have that sense of discernment, what looks right, what doesn't look right. And the AI firms are struggling with this issue, the hallucination issue, because I've looked at a lot of different products on the market. One of them actually, it's really interesting. You can click a button to verify the AI output. They have a live lawyer in every jurisdiction in Australia, in Canada, in the United States, all 50 states in the US. There's a lawyer waiting in all those different areas to verify the output. And it comes back in 24 hours. That's a very expensive model, obviously. But, you know, there are these real challenges there as well. And can I just say on the question of being novel, you know, AI is a predictive model, right? And when you think about legal arguments, sometimes the best precedents that ever come in the legal system are totally original ideas that actually the system has never had that idea before. We're talking, you know, negligence law. There's a very famous case, the snail in the ginger beer bottle case, Donahue and Stevenson, right? And these are very original ideas that some human brain came up with. And I worry about that in making novel arguments, right? Are we just going to be kind of recycling what's all been done before? Or are we actually coming up with something truly original? And that's something I want the students to think about as well.
Just before we go on any further, any questions from the audience?
Hi, Eric night at Macquarie University. I really enjoyed the discussion. Maybe a question to you, Jenny, or to the panel more broadly. I mean, I think as we think about the overt message of the value of a university education in critical thinking and self-regulation and people skills, what is the covert message to people who are not suited to a university education, you know, or for whom university education is not right? I think it's an important thing just to think about. I'm just curious how you would think about that.
He gave it to you, Jenny.
All right. There's two different things that come to my mind when we think about that. One is I think I believe in education. And I actually think that if we had the time and resources as a country, as a world, as a society to educate everyone, that would be a good thing. So I want you to sort of hear what I'm about to say in that context, because I'm going to say something different to that. But it's expensive. If we're asking, you know, as I look back 100 years, my great aunt left school at 12. And she was perfectly capable of going on, but her family needed her in the shop. So she left school at 12, and that was it for her for education. Then we now, you know, when I was going through high school, 15 was the year at which you could leave school. Gradually, we're pushing it up. The expectation now for almost, you know, it's a normal expectation that people will stay till they're 17 or 18. We could shift that up and say we actually think there's a value in the critical thinking skills for almost everyone to go until you're sort of 21. We're sort of edging towards that as a society, but it's super expensive. Every incremental step we've taken has cost something in the short term, but probably gained us a lot in the long term. AI and productivity and improvements overall in the society may mean we can afford it. So maybe we want to do that. However, having said all of that, some people may choose not to, or the kind of job they want to do, they just sort of say, look, I need to understand how to, you know, build a house. That's the kind of work that I want to do. And reading Shakespeare through to, you know, third year level is not going to help me build a house, which is probably true. It may help them as a person, as a citizen, to get joy out of life, to be informed about and able to participate in big democratic discussions of the day, all things that I think we might as a society want to choose to do. But, you know, we need more plumbers and builders, and we need more people. We've actually got too few of those people. And increasingly, I think those jobs are the ones that we are selecting away from by sending people to university, and yet they are actually necessary and they're good jobs and they're needed by society. Now I've lost the track of where you were going, but should we be basically helping people to think through, is this right for me? I think that I'm not sure I agree with the government's implicit policy of sending everyone or as many people towards university as possible. And I think that there is a weird devaluing of important jobs that we ought to find some way of valuing, and university education may or may not be useful for those. But I'm torn because I also think that education is a great good that we might in fact want to invest in. Would my great aunt have been better off doing education beyond 12 years old? Yes, she would. And yet at the time, there was a kind of a calculus that said, to work in a shop, you've got all you need, don't bother with more education. So I don't want to be doing the same thing now, but at the same time, I think we're also pushing more people towards a university education than perhaps we need to, and we're not funding it well enough either. So I think we've got big choices. So that was a very long and not particularly decisive answer, sorry.
Well, I think a big issue that comes into this also is parents. So I teach first year. We run a reflective task about why you're here. Tell me your origin story of why you're here. And once we dig into that with a lot of students, they're like, actually, I don't want to be here. At which my retention team probably don't want to hear that I then say, well, if you don't want to be here, what do you want to do? Pastry chef, builder, plumber. But the parental expectation from especially a lot of first generation migrant parents, is university is the ticket to more job security and more financial freedom. And so that can be really hard for a lot of young people to go, oh, well, I really wanted to go to TAFE, but my parents have said university. So here I am battling in something I don't want to do. And so how do we reach out through schools, with school counselors? A lot of schools have their reputation based on how many students got an ATAR of this, how many students got into a top university. We need to value all jobs, whether that's childcare or childcare especially. But then how do we ensure that we pay people in all jobs a livable, respectable wage, manage house prices, all these other things, so that university isn't what is considered the biggest ticket to greater financial freedom. And if one of my kids, one of them wants to currently be a YouTuber, I'm like, you need some discipline specific expertise. He's like, you're a YouTuber. I'm like, I have discipline specific expertise. If he wants to be a plumber, I will say you'll earn more money in your lifetime than I ever will. But educating parents on that aspect of what is out there and what are the opportunities, and that a VET, a vocational education, is just as good in a different way, different type of education, but still just as important.
Marek, a quick word from you. Google, multiple sources on Google describe you as an international expert on early childhood education, among other things. Tell us about
Google.
Tell us about childcare and degrees, and how are we educating people for early childhood education, an undervalued area?
It's very good. So, that's true. I am a former kindergarten teacher, and I am a kindergarten teacher because when I finished my undergraduate qualification, I realized as a philosopher, I get no job. So I had to into something that given me a job. And I spent a lot of years teaching in kindergarten before I moved to academia. And I do a lot of teacher education in early years and also in other areas. But I think that one of the critical things is that early years are the most important years and formative years in everyone's life. And we tend to know first 3-5 years of child's life are the most formative and important things. Whatever happens during that time, the things you learn, the skills you gain, the knowledge you gain will take you throughout the rest of your life. I now have a generation of when I was a kindergarten teacher, I'm tracking still those kids that I taught, 20, 25 years ago. And they are now managers all around the world and working in different fields. And we keep in touch with many of them. And you can also tell that what happened in those first 5-6 years of their life, how important it was. So I think that teacher education, especially, is for early child, is really important, and and we need to be really carefully thinking about it, how we do that. But I just wanted to say one thing, and because I thought that we went very broad, starting from somewhere and ended up somewhere else, and I just somehow think that one of the things that I'm taking from this discussion, which is really interesting and really important, for me, is that all this debate about the future and uncertainty and AI and where it all goes, is it doom and gloom, is it exciting, is that how much it reminds me how important it is to be human. And so the whole sort of story of AI and this technological advancement is basically a story of being a human, and we're actually being a human and making mistakes where it actually matters. And I often think how exciting it is to get an email with grammatical errors. And I think that's fantastic. I mean, how many, I'm not that interested into getting unwavering support, knowing that it's one of the most common words generated by ChatGPT. Yeah. So I would be, I'm really, really excited about that, being human and being in early years, and that's why I'm sort of want to link it to that. Being early years sort of reminds you, and being in kindergarten, I try to get to kindergarten still as much as I can, because that's where you remind you what the life is about, both the excitement, both the sheer sort of thrive for knowledge, what the learning could be, what it means to be competent and confident learner, what actually it means to developing friendships and cooperation and working together, resolving conflicts in different ways. And all these things of learning in early years are so important to remind us it's not only about saving time by technological sort of shortcuts and advantages, but it's the life and the future of mankind needs to be deeply human, and whether AI will help us or not, that's a sort of secondary issue. And that's why I said at the very beginning, story of AI for me is a story of intellectual project of humankind rather than just around just creating some kind of idea whether this is about future jobs or not, because that's all of this is secondary towards who we become as a society, who we become as a people. So
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a beautiful spot to finish up with. Thank you for rock stars of Australian higher education that we're going to hear more of. Lorne, Amanda, Jenny and Marek, thank you so much.